Well, family, you guys are so amazing. I want to say thank you so very much for your connections, for your likes and your shares and your comments. We see every engagement that you guys engage with. This is what I need you to do. I need you to share this video now. I have a special guest on the 4th series of the Preachers of the 757, none other than Pastor Cedric Rouson. I believe that this is going to be one iconic interview that's going to change your life and also bless you and change your perspective on the way that you see ministry. It's entitled Extreme Ministry. Tune in now. Thank you so very much, man, for being a special guest on the Preachers of the 757. Listen, as I start with every person I interview, tell us something about yourself that we don't know.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things about me you probably don't know.
Yeah.
I actually went to real estate school.
Wow.
Over 10 years ago.
Wow.
I thought at one particular point in time
Yes.
I was going to be an agent.
Wow.
And so I had gone to school, had graduated the school, and I had literally, only thing I didn't do was take the state exam.
Wow.
And it was about that time that I got called back to my parents' church.
Yes.
I left our home church for a while.
Okay.
And I ended up being called back, Lord sent me back,
Wow.
and began to work in ministry and never picked back up the path of real estate.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's horn in on that. Because oftentimes there's preachers, associate ministers that have been called to a different assignment. Mm-hmm. But I'm at my family's church. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult for me to cut ties because I don't want to hurt nobody's feelings.
Right.
How important is it to follow the voice of God and hurt other people's feelings, or make sure people's feelings, your family in particular feelings, are intact and not listen to the voice of God?
You know, there's a paradigm in Scripture oftentimes where the place you're planted isn't always the place that you end up.
Yeah.
You're developed in one place.
Yes.
I think about the parable of the wheat and tares, right?
Yeah.
Both of the wheat and the tare grown up together in the field.
Yeah.
And at the end it said that when harvest time comes, I will say to the reapers, go and bind up the tares in bundles to burn them.
Right.
And I'm thinking, if I'm the wheat, then
Right.
finally, yes, I can have the field to myself.
Yes, yes.
And yet he says, and then tell them to go gather up the wheat and take it to the barn.
Wow.
So the point is, God will often put you in a place.
Yes.
He develops you in that place.
Yes.
But you have to be flexible enough to understand that the place you grow in always the place you use. Okay? That
Wow.
the field is my place of cultivation.
Yes.
But ultimately my calling is to the barn so that I can be used. And sometimes the people who love you the most aren't always as broad in perspective
Yes.
to embrace your own transition.
Yes.
And so I think when it comes down to a call from God,
Absolutely.
you have to obey God.
You have to.
And it's wonderful if you can do that
Yes.
and make
Yes.
family or those who are close to you comfortable.
Right.
But if it ever comes down to it, man, you got to follow God.
Absolutely. So what are the dangers of I'm staying in this place? Because I hear it time and time again. You know, I want to move on. I know God has called me to move on, but my family needs me. You know, so how can a person get to the place of standing firm and saying, listen, God is telling me to go and I have to go?
Yeah, well, it's really about trusting God.
Yeah.
You have to trust God beyond your own experience. Each of us has this thing about us. In fact, I just did a seminar outside of Philly, and one of the major things I did an exercise where I asked each person, was a group of persons at our age range, and I asked them, I said, what is it that you value most outside of God? Most of them said family.
Wow.
And then I asked the second question, I said, now what are you willing to fail at so that you can succeed at whatever the thing is you value?
Yes.
And it was interesting to hear what the answers are, but
Right.
the point I was trying to get across is you can't succeed at everything.
Right.
You have to be willing to fail at something.
Right, right.
And so in truth, I think a lot of times when it comes to this trusting God,
Yes.
it becomes about priority. Lord, if this is what you're calling me to do, whatever this is,
Yes.
then that means I'm willing to forfeit something else being
Yes.
as great so that I can be obedient.
Right.
You know, and ultimately we quote this all the time, and I
Yes.
don't know if we apply it to this context.
Yes.
Obedience
It's better than sacrifice.
is better than sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And most of the time I stay where I am, I do what I do because of my sacrifice for people I love, or for
Yes.
the environment I'm in. But obedience is better than sacrifice.
Absolutely. So let's talk about extreme ministry. What has happened in your ministry? I know one of our first conversations that really stuck hard to me because, and actually we got a lot of feedback from it as well. People were saying that, wow, he went through that. Because the damaging part about, especially being in ministry, especially when we're humble and we're just excited that God is choosing to use us because
Right.
he doesn't have to use us. So people look at you, Pastor Cedric Rouson, as this guy, you know, who's been on the Word Network, is growing a church, to the magnitude in our generation. I text you all the time. I say, you're the Bishop T.D. Jakes of our generation, and I really believe that. I see that. But what do you do to keep yourself humble? And especially in the season and in the place that God is using you. How do you keep yourself humble?
Well, to me, humility is about truth.
Yes.
And pride is about lies.
Yeah.
Pride is a self-lie.
Yeah.
It's a lie you tell yourself.
Absolutely.
People who are arrogant are people who believe the commercial
Yes.
built about their own life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you live within your own skin,
Yeah.
you don't get the benefit of just seeing the things other people from the outside compliment about you.
Absolutely.
I can definitely speak
Right,
for me.
right,
I don't
right.
believe the hype
Right.
because I live with me.
Absolutely.
Which means I know the me that other people don't get
Don't
to
see.
see. I know the me that's constantly
Right.
being placed under the blood of Jesus.
Right.
I know the me that if the Holy Spirit doesn't work on me every day, I have struggles like everybody else.
Yes.
And if it is not but for the blood and for
Right.
the grace of God, then I won't sustain.
Yes.
So a part of it for me is living in the balance.
Yes.
Between greatness and grief.
I love it.
The balance between competence and character.
Yes.
And when you understand that what I do is not who I am,
Yes.
then I won't fall prey to the praise that comes attached to what I do.
Right, right.
Folks say, "Oh, we love you." You don't know me.
Right.
You love what I do.
Right.
You don't know me. You don't live with me.
Right.
That's why it carries a different weight when my wife or my family, somebody who's around me says I
That's
love
so
you.
true.
Because you see me.
Right.
People who see me on this stage,
Right.
and I'm not saying I'm not transparent because I am.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying you don't see all sides of me.
Absolutely.
You love how I make you feel when I'm around you.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, when you live in your truth
Yes.
and you understand all sides of it,
Right.
I don't think it's very hard to be humble.
Right.
Right. Humble people are just simply honest people.
Yes.
People who are honest enough with themselves to recognize their need for God,
Yes.
their need for grace every day,
Right.
and don't believe the hype that other people try to get you to eat.
Right.
It is poison,
Right. It is
and
poison.
it will kill you.
Every time.
Absolutely.
And so many people fall victim to that because, especially being in ministry. My dad always said that if you want credit, be a preacher. Because there's so much credit given to the preacher, but you can't get drunk off the credit.
Right.
And the question I want to ask you piggybacking on what I said, one of our first conversations, you said there was somebody saying that you won't be a pastor. There's so many people, preachers, ushers, people that want to start businesses that had that same concept or that same conversation. You're not going to do this. How or what helped you get over that word that someone's tried to deposit to your spirit?
Well, I have to say this, first of all, about the issue of being a pastor, period. I was okay with that part. It wasn't because I wasn't, and I don't say this to knock other people.
Right.
I wasn't ambitious to be a pastor. I didn't dream of being a pastor. My thoughts were I was going to write music, record, probably have a group.
Right.
I would be somewhere traveling and would come home to see my parents. That was always my thought as a child. Pastoring really wasn't in the forefront of my mind at all. So even though by that point I had gone into ministry, the idea of someone telling me in context, you'll always be a number two.
Yes.
You won't be a number one. It wasn't the pastoring issue.
Yeah.
It was more so the underlying presupposition behind it.
Yes.
That said you're not good enough.
Wow.
It was the hurt of you're not good enough to serve in this kind of role.
Capacity, right.
Capacity. You'll always be, and there's nothing wrong being number two.
Right,
I gotta say that too.
right,
It's
right.
just that by that point in my life in ministry, it was the weight of what was carried, and to some degree the context in terms of persons who shared it. That caused that weight. To answer your question, my mother was singularly responsible for pulling me out of that. I remember, and this is the irony, and I share this story with our church sometimes. It was a long time before I shared that with my mother, and one day I just sitting at our kitchen table shared with her what had been said, and she looks at me. She and my father had just started this ministry, so we're talking now, this is 10 and a half years ago, and she looked at me and she said to me that day, she said, "Son, not only do I believe God has called you pastor," she said, "but for all I know, you just may pastor my church one day."
Wow.
Never knowing
Right.
what the future would hold.
Right.
I would have never guessed in a million years that it would be on the heels of her death
Yes.
and on the heels of my father's illness
Right.
that God would raise me up to serve our
Right.
congregation.
Wow.
So for me, it's not so much about the pastoring aspect.
Yeah.
It's just about knowing, and particularly for where I was at that stage in life after having left my parents' church,
Right.
kind of ran away, and
Right.
you know, I didn't backslide or
Right,
anything,
right.
but it was just the insecurity of that I had at that moment. To be assured
Yes.
that God still saw worth in me
Yes.
to be able to serve, much less lead.
Wow.
Oh wow, yeah, that meant everything to me.
Let me ask this question, because there's so many people in front of the camera. It's going to say, no, I trusted God the whole way round. But let me ask you, I have to go to the edge. Hearing those words, at any point, did you try to prove those people wrong?
No,
Love it.
because I don't think I was confident enough to. I didn't have opportunity to.
Wow.
Here's the thing that you have to know about me. You know, music has historically been for me
Yes.
what I would call that crutch
Right.
or my fallback. Right. You know. So if anything, particularly in that season, I would have proven people wrong by touring more
Right.
or going on the road and showing I can still be a success.
Right.
I didn't have a platform
Yeah.
to preach or really operate in a sign of ministry to show I can run ministry.
Right.
I didn't really get into that until my parents started ministry over.
Oh, wow.
I may have preached at our home church. Maybe I think I did one youth revival, and I preached maybe 2 other times outside of that.
Right.
I didn't have a lot of opportunity. Because I was a minister of music, and then of course I left.
Right.
And then when I came back, I was playing and directing choirs again,
Right.
serving wherever I was told to serve.
Wow.
You know, you don't come back in and get
Yes,
to the
right,
top,
right.
And
Work your way back
yeah,
up.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but it wasn't until we started this ministry that I had an opportunity to really serve behind the scenes. So I guess for me personally,
Right.
I didn't have that. I've got to prove something to you in that vein.
Right.
I'm more so for me, it was just okay. Let me try to hone in on what I know I'm good at, to survive until God fixes whatever parts of my heart I'm insecure.
As for my journey, I traveled out as well. I wasn't one of those preachers now in the 757 that was groomed to be a preacher. You know, all I know was my father to be a preacher. But let me ask you this question. I ventured out as well, went to Atlanta, picked up a lot of great tools. That's when I took ministry seriously. 2012, I was licensed to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. You, in your season of venturing out, of leaving, what tools did you pick up out that you didn't have or didn't pick up while you were in?
Oh wow! I'm gonna tell you, there are many of them.
Yeah.
The thing I'll probably say the most impactful was I learned the struggle of ministry.
Wow.
Because as a pastor's kid,
Yeah.
you know, my father, by the time I was 10,
Yeah.
my father had been pastoring 11 years.
Right.
And at that point, our church had started exploding.
Wow.
So it was, I don't really remember the struggle.
Right.
I could hear
Absolutely.
my father, my mother tell me stories about it.
Yes.
I didn't remember the struggle.
Right.
I remember with my father preaching and hundreds and hundreds of people a year joining the church, and we were having to knock down walls and rebuild buildings and start new services. And so what my time away did was show me what it was like to have to help gather the money to pay the rent. Take your personal stuff and invest it in the church.
Absolutely.
Having to do whatever it took. I had a beautiful opportunity to serve a wonderful ministry for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But it taught me struggle, not just struggle in ministry, personal struggle.
Right.
You know, and because of the pride in me as a young man. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm 18, 19 years old.
Right.
In that age range. My parents lived in a beautiful home.
Right.
It was almost as if I was living there, but wasn't.
Right.
You know, I'd almost just kind of, I mean, I dropped out of college.
Right.
I was, you know, I'd gone out and eating sugar rice. I mean, it just, you know, it taught me struggle.
Yes.
And what I didn't know is that I would need that later in ministry, because I wouldn't inherit a church that was the size of the church my parents pastored for years.
Oh, wow.
You see, I would inherit, particularly by the time I got out, I would inherit a much smaller church.
Yeah.
And I needed to know some of the struggles in ministry, because for me, I needed wisdom to compensate my lack of age.
I love that.
You see,
Yeah.
I didn't get the benefit of starting a church with people who are all my age.
Right,
I know
right.
pastors who have that benefit.
Right.
I had the benefit, though it's a benefit, also a challenge,
Yes.
of pastoring 4-generation church.
Absolutely.
And so I needed some of that struggle.
Yeah.
Bishop John Guns puts it this way.
Yeah.
He says sometimes to young preachers, he says, I see you have oil
Yeah.
on you,
Right.
but you don't have blood on you yet. I needed some things to help show, even in my preparation, I've got a little bit of blood.
Yeah.
to qualify. And so that taught me that. That taught me struggle. It taught me how to balance a budget on a very small scale and things like that. Make it work, grind it out, do what we have to do, so that we won't just have the veneer of successful ministry, but we'll actually be a healthy church.
Love it. So let's transition to this. It's going to be a little bit of edgy, but I believe it's going to help a lot of people. A lot of preachers that come up, start pastoring. I'm inviting friends to preach for me. I'm inviting heavy hitters to preach for me, because I feel as if I invite the heavy hitters, I'll have a connection, and that'll open up doors for me that I can't open up myself. How do you go about when you invite preachers? I know I talked to Pastor Green, and one thing he said is that he consults God before he invites preachers in, before he goes out to preach. If it's an assignment, if I'm going to help or I'm going to hinder. If I'm a hinder, I'm not going to accept it. Right. What is your take on that?
Well, no, I agree totally. I think that, and I would call that, I would put that in the conviction category. Is there conviction from God? I also look at character. I don't want to bring a person in who's going to fleece the sheep.
Absolutely.
Or a person who may be extremely gifted, but it just is not a good fit. But the other thing that I look at is compatibility to the assignment. Our church is a house of restoration. We're a second chance home for people. So I have a message of restoration. So I have to put in context. If I'm bringing in a preacher, does this preacher in some way, are there going to be a benefit to what I believe the assignment is on this house? For this house.
I love it.
Because not everything works everywhere. I thought about this morning as I was preparing to come here. Every message you preach is not for the nation.
Absolutely.
Every book you write is not going to go worldwide. Every moment, there are certain moments that God designed specifically for certain things, and so that's a part of my prayer. Now, obviously, my company or camaraderie is that fourth element. I do preach people I have a relationship with. I also invite those who I don't have a relationship with. But what I don't like to do is to use the pulpit for networking. I think we have substituted relationships for networking. And I think that's dangerous to leverage an audience with God's sheep for the purpose of trying to smooch with somebody for the next thing. I don't believe in that. That's just not my thing. I'm not condemning people, but I'm not going to invite you because I'm trying to preach at your church. And I feel like if I bring you and treat you well, you'll owe me.
Absolutely.
I don't like that.
I love that. I love it. So let's look at it. What is your favorite generation? I know as a preacher, you have to pastor all generations. What is your favorite?
Well, one, I think I'd be a fool if I didn't say my own. It's funny. I'm a millennial, but I'm really I have an old mind.
I love it. What's your favorite old school song?
I don't know. I mean, music. I love all kind of music. I have all types of songs. I mean, it depends on my mood. Depends on the day. I love my generation, and I think our generation is misunderstood to some degree. I do think there are different parts to our generation. We're not all the same. It's not a monolithic perspective. But I also love being around baby boomers. I love singers, and I love. So it really, for me, I'm kind of eclectic that way, where it just depends. I love the rebellion of a Gen Xer. And how they're independent in thought. They were the first latchkey kids. So there's an approach to how you have to approach them because they don't like big government, even in the church.
Absolutely.
So sometimes they're mistrusting. So I enjoy cracking down the walls of barriers. It literally just depends on the moment. But I mean, ultimately, I rock with my generation, though sometimes I feel like the old guy amongst them, not by age, but by experience. I love that we are learning as millennials, we're learning to recreate what success looks like.
I love it. So the traditional style of church. You come to the church, you have the communion table in front. The two chairs on the side, sit down. And the pulpit has the chairs in the pulpit. How do you feel about the traditional style church versus the way church is done now?
I heard this once in seminary. They said that tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Tradition in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. We have to be careful that we're not converted into traditionalism. Got it? where we become stuck in any one modality.
Right.
For me, those types of things don't really matter for me. For one thing, I mean, I'm surrounded by all kinds of preachers, and many of whom are Baptists, but I'm a Pentecostal boy.
Absolutely.
So we had the communion table in the front. We had the deacon chairs, but the deacons didn't sit in them. They had borrowed it from somebody's Baptist church. So we grew up in a spirit-filled environment. It was a little freer, and of course, my father was very contemporary in his approach to ministry for that time. So I think every generation has its own preferences, and we just have to be careful that we not try to turn our preferences into God's principles and precepts. Just because I like it that way doesn't mean it's got to be that way.
Has to be that way,
I mean, we have a more of a modern flow here, but we intentionally do something for every generation.
I love that.
And as long as it fits the house. The one thing I'll say about it is, whoever leads that ministry has to be careful not to try to force the change on a church. If I've been called to a traditional church somewhere, I've got to be honest enough with the context of that church. Because that church had an identity before I got there.
That's it.
And I have to honor whatever that is and then slowly transition that into the vision God has given. But to just go in and throw out all the chairs or take the communion table away, you're going to lose your job. And I say that because sometimes younger pastors in particular, we're so hungry to compete with what we see on TV or somewhere else in the Christian market, if you will, that we'll make decisions that derail and depreciate the value and the path that's in our place of assignment.
I love that perspective. So let me ask you, let's transition to this. Understand the traditional side, and I see that one thing about it, you said that you have 4 generations in your church. How do you minister to each generation effectively?
With intentionality. We've got to get rid of, and there's so much we can say with this, but I won't. We've got to get rid of this idea that to be spiritual equals being spontaneous. That's not the truth. It doesn't have to be spontaneous to be spiritual. We need to plan.
Absolutely.
We need to be intentional. So what I try to do is be intentional from everything from the way, like in our case, we have special parking for seniors.
I love it.
Special parking for guests, but we also have a valet service for seniors.
Oh, wow.
If you don't want to park your car, our parking lot ministry, you pull right on up to the door, rain or shine, our parking lot ministry will park the car for you. We have special seating for our mothers where they get bottled water and mints and whatever, tissue and whatever else they want. They never have to get up except to go use the restroom. There are things we do to honor seniors in our church intentionally, because we have such a younger demographic. And we have a very heavy baby boomer demographic as well. But my point is, there are certain things we do, even through our worship. My sister, Kristen, is our lead, a worship lead. We have 5 of them, but she's the chief one. And she has a methodology to how we do worship, where she'll take a very contemporary song and then match it with a less contemporary song, a good gospel song, the type of feel. And then she'll match that with the hymn. And before worship is over, we've reached each person.
Every generation.
I do the same thing. I might have one Sunday, I may have on a collar and we're doing Holy Communion or something. Another Sunday, I'm going to be in jeans and a t-shirt. Or maybe in my approach to preaching, there'll be things that I say, and I'll joke like I'm old. I say, oh, y'all young people don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm throwing out an old phrase, and I've got all the baby boomers and the silent gens. They over there just cracking up because they're laughing at me because they know I didn't live in a generation. But I'm intentionally reaching that while at the same time being relative to those who are my contemporaries.
I love it.
It's many ways that you can do it, even beyond Sunday service. Many ways you can do that. You don't have to isolate one over the other.
Absolutely. So, I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Being on the Preachers of 757. What would be something that you would leave with some senior pastor, some seasoned pastor, some young pastor, some young preacher that says, I believe that God is calling me to be a pastor soon? What would you share with them about ministry, about the totality and the sum up of your experience in ministry?
Here's the one thing. If I had to choose, and there's so many things I could say, but if I had to choose one thing to say, particularly to younger pastors, younger preachers, those in our generation, really anyone seeking purpose. The Bible says in Acts chapter 7, David served his generation and rested with his fathers. As much as we know of King David's life, ultimately, one verse of scripture summed up his whole life by saying he served his generation. You are called to serve your generation. You are called to be relevant to the times in which you live in. You are called to be disruptive, to be willing to cut against the grain, to be willing to while being obedient to the call of God on your life, be flexible with God enough to allow God to use you, even if it's in a way you haven't seen done already. The second part to that is, if David served his generation, then that means that ultimately, no matter how great he is, somebody was coming behind him. I want to take my fleeting moments to talk not to the preacher in you, but to the person in you. Get a life, or you will become intoxicated from the fumes of ministry, and you will end up becoming a lesser version of yourself with more show and less depth, because you have lost your love for life. God has called you to be as whole as the people you reach, and a part of that is allowing yourself to identify who you are outside of your pulpit, outside of your platform. If they're not calling on you to preach, minister, go here or there. God has opened up many doors for me, and if I had to really explain how they happened, they honestly happened through two things. Number one, I never really sought them out. I've always been the guy who's been content to be where I am, and I love what God has called me to do. And the second thing is, I've honored the relationships that are right around me, whether it's my pastor and father in the gospel, whether it's my bishop, whether it is my brothers and sisters who surround me in ministry. I have never dropped off those who love me, trying to chase after those I want to be in a room with. And for me, God has always used the people right around me to open the doors in places where I desire to go. So I want to just challenge you, serve your generation, know your limitations, get a life outside of what you do, and learn to value true relationships with people who are right around you, and honor the people, because you never know who God may use right around you to introduce you to your destiny. I'm Cedric Rouson. I pray you've been blessed.